Ja, grüezi miteinander.
Well, good afternoon, one and all. I'm delighted to be able to speak Swiss German, and I'm so happy to see all of you here at this open forum session dedicated to plastic pollution. This afternoon, we'll be switching from one language to another. I know that there are many locals in attendance, but also many guests and people from abroad who only speak English. So don't worry if from time to time I switch into English, and also I will speak German. I'm delighted to say how happy I am to see so many people here at the session on plastic pollution. And I think it really hits the spot, as we said last year already. It's an issue which there is an awful lot to talk about. It's one of the great issues of today. It would be presumptuous on our part to say that we're going to solve the problem here today, but at least we need to focus on the issue, discuss it, and perhaps allow some of you to learn something or take something home from this meeting.
Here to talk about an issue, talk about a problem that is very high on the agenda at the moment, that thankfully, I would say, people talk about. I think you can't talk about it enough as long as we have that issue and that problem. And I think it's a great idea to open this forum, also the open forum, to the issue, and to be also talking to the people from and in Davos about one of the topics that, as I said, is very high on the list and high on the agenda of not always the civil society, but also the politicians and the governments. I'd like to introduce our panelists to you in a kind of a short way. You probably have seen who's on the panel anyway, but let me just start from left to right. We have Cathy here. She's a global shaper, very committed to the cause, very busy young entrepreneur and political person. She's working amongst others for the Canadian government, and she's very, as I said, very involved and committed in these questions that we're talking about today. Welcome. We have Heather Koldewey. She's a fellow from the National Geographic Society. She's working for the Zoological Society of London. She's also an honorary professor at the University of Exeter, and she's an expert when it comes to animals. Also animals of the sea. I know she's very interested in seahorses, and she's done her thesis about the brown trout in Wales. So if you have a question about a sea and water animal, please refer it to Heather today. Then we're very honored to have Peter Thomson here. He's the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. The first one in this position. I'm very happy and very honored to say you're actually the first Fijian citizen that I have on a panel. He comes from a region, of course, which is heavily involved and which is also a victim of these issues that we're talking about. So he can give his own very personal opinion and approach to that as well. Then we have Tom Szaky here. Welcome, Tom. He's the founder and CEO of TerraCycle. They're the global leader in the collection and recycling of post-consumer waste. Very much involved also in the question, what do we do with the plastic? What can we do better? How can we transition from a linear economy to a more circular economy? And we're very curious of what you have to say about the title here as well, Plastic Pollution, an End in Sight. And then, last but not least, welcome also to Gloria Fluxa Thienemann. She's the Vice Chairman and Chief Sustainability Officer of the Iberostar Group. I think a group that many of us know. Whoever has gone on a vacation in faraway countries has probably been in one of the Iberostar hotels. She's from Spain, and she's also a young global leader at the World Economic Forum. Maybe to start off and to give the people here a little kind of an idea why you are actually sitting here. With some of you, it's easier, just looking at your position of what you do in life, but maybe to kind of ask you almost like in an elevator pitch way, just that we do the rounds, and why is plastic pollution, why is the plastic issue high on your agenda as well, higher on your list? Cathy, please.
Thank you so much, Urs. Why don't I start by telling you a little bit about the Global Shapers community of the World Economic Forum. So I'm here to represent the community, to represent the voices of youth around the world in this forum. Essentially, the community is comprised of over 7,000 global shapers in over 150 countries that are committed to taking action on socially important issues in their regional communities. And we asked the global shapers around the world, what is the one issue that you're passionate about that is urgent that we need to address together? And together we identified climate change as a #1 priority. So that's why I'm here today. And I'm here to not only share ideas with you and share the great initiatives that young people around the world have undertaken on climate change and plastic pollution, but also to take ideas from you so that we can then create a narrative and build action together. We have 50 global shapers here representing the community at Davos. That is less than 2% of the entire list of attendees at Davos. So I want to make sure that I'm amplifying the voices of youth. So I will rely on you to tell me what your ideas are and what your call to action is as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cathy. Very important input as well. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So sharing ideas should be the idea of today as well. We will open the discussion, of course, as well. So we're looking forward to questions, comments, criticism as well. This is an open forum, so we're open for everything what happens today. Heather, please. You have been doing a session this morning, also within the WEF, within the conference center, about that exact theme topic. It's easier to understand why you're an expert in this cause, but why is this issue so close to your heart?
Okay, well, rather than representing youth, which I wish I did, but try to, I come from the angle of the fish. So I'm a marine biologist, a freshwater biologist, a fish biologist, basically. So I spend as much of my time as possible in, on, or under the water. So coming to the mountains is, the cold mountains is a very unusual experience for me. But over time, over the last 20 plus years of working in this job, I've become more and more aware of plastic and plastic pollution. And that starts from my own life and where I live. I live in a coastal community. When I was a child, if I went to the beach, I just enjoyed the beach. Now when I take my children, aged 10 and 12, to the beach, we do a beach clean because plastic is more and more present on our beaches. And that's the first, without even being a scientist, you can see that change just in the behavior and what's present and how our environment is changing. And secondly, I am very fortunate with National Geographic and with a number of the programs I work with to be able to explore some of the ocean wilderness areas. And a few years ago, I went to the Chagos Archipelago in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It takes several days to get there by boat. You can't fly there. And it's uninhabited, 55 uninhabited islands. And on one of these islands, we stopped for a very short period of time. We were mostly doing scientific research from the boat. In just 20 minutes, we collected 334 single-use plastic water bottles that came from 10 different countries from the labels that were still on the bottle. Now, all of those bottles had been in somebody's hand at some point in time. And those bottles will last in the environment for at least 500, 600 years, slowly breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces where they then start being eaten by everything from plankton to whales. And so this really elevated my action on plastic to try and do something about it. And I hope to talk about some of the solutions and not just the problems during this forum.
Absolutely, that's what it should be here for as well, that we talk about, how to get out of it and how we can solve as much as we can. Peter, I've talked about where you're from. You're from one of those islands, who are in those areas as well. You've been for a very long time involved in the UN. You've been, amongst others, the president of the 71st session of the UN General Assembly. You've been a permanent representative of the Fiji Islands to the UN. Now, as I said, the special envoy for the ocean, or as a god of ocean, as someone said in a previous discussion. Why is this? Why? Not a term you like to hear, I take it from there. But why is that topic so close to you?
Look, whether you come from Fiji or whether you come from Switzerland, The ocean is central to your life. Where does the snow come from? It comes from the ocean. Where does the snow go to when it melts into water? It goes into a river that goes to the ocean. So, you know, the ocean is very important to Swiss people, even though you're landlocked. You know, Count Otto von Bismarck, who was, I studied him back in the Dark Ages when I was at university, at the unification of Germany. I remember him being asked, what is the difference between a politician and a statesman? And Bismarck said that a statesman is a politician who thinks of his grandchildren. So I ask people to think like statesmen and stateswomen. You know, don't just think about your short-term lives. Think about what the world's going to be like for your grandchildren. And when we look at the climate and when we look at the ocean, we see that on current trends, we are condemning our grandchildren to very, very difficult times. So we are not behaving like statesmen and stateswomen, and we have to start behaving that way if we are responsible grandparents, as I am, and looking around the room, I see some of you are as well. Glad to see you here. So that's the motivation of our work. The good news, as we'll discuss this morning, is that there is a plan to do the right thing for the planet and for the climate and for the ocean. And I'll be happy to answer any questions in relation to that plan. But you know, see the world as connected in every sense. See the fact that every second breath you're taking up here in Davos is coming from the ocean, oxygen produced by the ocean. And I think you will realize the importance of us stopping the plastic getting into the ocean from the river as it runs from Davos down to the sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So we're part of the ocean people as well, the Swiss, for once. Thank you very much. We're all statesmen and stateswomen in that regard. We're all, you know, in a way responsible for what's happening. Someone who's heavily involved in that and who makes sure that we're all responsible is Tom, of course. You're the author of 3 books as well. One with the quite unusual title, "Garbage is Great." Can you elaborate on that one?
Yes, absolutely. So I come to this from an overall waste perspective, not necessarily just plastic, but I think waste in general is incredibly problematic. And it's a very odd academic concept. I'm actually very surprised it's not even taught at school all that much, or university. There's no classes on waste, yet every object in this room, with not a single exception, will become waste and will be owned physically by the garbage industry. You know, today, we many times measure our status in society by the accumulation of stuff that we have, yet all of that will be waste, and not just will it be waste, we'll have paid someone to take it when that happens. 99% of it all becoming waste within a single year. And to me, I think, you know, waste really came about in 70 years ago or so. So it's a very modern idea, which is where I have hope. I think we can solve it because it hasn't been with us for all that long, the modern conception of waste. So what I'm really passionate about is thinking through how can we solve this through business mechanisms and other mechanisms as well, to try to make things technically possible to be able to recycle, then make that not just technically possible, practically possible, which is all about the economics of waste. Typically what tends to make something not recyclable, simply that it's not profitable for a waste management company to do it. And then, most importantly, looking at all of us as individuals is to actually take part. And I think we tend to, I'll just leave it at this last thought, point our fingers to large organizations, you know, whether it's the manufacturers or retailers who produce or sell our goods. But I think what's incredibly powerful is us as consumers, we vote multiple times a day, no matter how old we are, for the future we want based on what we buy. And this is the most powerful mechanism to change this, and to change it incredibly quickly. And I would just hope that we all wake up to that privilege that we have and do it consciously.
Thank you very much, Tom. Gloria, you're in an area, in an industry which produces a lot of waste. When we talk about waste, tourism, hospitality industry,
Sure.
I think that already is a reason why you're involved in these questions as well as a head of sustainability, I guess.
Precisely, and for those of you who haven't been at that Iberostar hotel, Iberostar is a tourism group. It's a family business based in Mallorca, Spain. We have different divisions. tour operators, travel agencies, but our core activity being hotels. We have 120 hotels operating in 19 countries. We serve to 8 million clients and are a family now of 35,000 employees. And at the moment, it's the third and fourth generation, my father, my sister, and I. And I believe we wouldn't have been able to write all the history we have had. We were born in 1877 as a family business if we wouldn't have been responsible. And it is a reality that each generation adapts that responsibility to what they're more close to. And my sister and I have been born in Mallorca, on an island, in the middle of the Mediterranean. We're both divers. So we decided, how can we take that responsibility forwards within our organization as well? And that's why the movement, the Wave of Change, was born. Out of humbleness, it is a movement that aims towards the stewardship of the oceans and its conservation and protection. And it's based on one commitment by 3 action lines. The first one being a responsible consumption of seafood. The second one being an incentivization of the coastal health. And the last one, which is the topic that brings us today, is plastics. And we've made now the claim to become, by 2019, a completely single-use plastic-free organization within the limits that the legislation will allow us.
Are you working together with other big companies or corporations, or is that more a kind of an independent initiative that you're doing?
True. I believe you first have to look inside and do your own homework, and the collaborations come along the way. Your credibility comes when you start doing things, right? 2019 was the first year we were the first hotel chain in Spain to completely eliminate the plastics, and thanks to that action, a lot of collaborations then came along and alliances.
There's a lot of initiatives going on at the moment. We'll hear from one from here, actually, from a local perspective as well, and we'll hear about corporations, and I think that is a point we'll have to talk about. You know, what is the responsibility of us all? What is the responsibility of big business as well, of corporations, of the economy? I would like to start, however, with some facts and figures, because we've seen already some in the initial films. In the Asian film that we saw, but if you really go and dig deeper a bit, I mean, some of these facts and figures and numbers are simply mind-blowing. When I read into it, it really makes you aware of the sheer size of the issue and the problem. Just something that you've heard as well. By 2050, the weight of plastic in the seas will be bigger than the weight of fish.
If nothing changes.
If nothing changes, of course, at the rate we're going now. All this is the disclaimer. If we don't act now, and if nothing changes, this will be the case. Something that is already the case is more than 8 million tons of plastic end up in our oceans each year, and which for me, hard to grasp, but if you put it the other way around, or if you put another fact in there, you can understand. That's read somewhere, the equivalent of 5 grocery bags full of plastics along every foot of shoreline in 192 countries of the world. When we see and hear these facts, Heather, and you kind of teach them all day long, that there might be a thought that this problem is so huge. How can we even grasp it, and then let alone try to solve it?
Yeah, it took a while. There was a very small number of scientists working on the topic to actually discover the problem, and now we have the scientific information to know the approximate quantities that are going into the ocean, the amount that's coming from rivers, the amount that's coming from mismanaged waste, and that's the primary problem. It's coming from us and it's going into the environment. And even ignoring the ocean, it's otherwise going into landfill. So at the moment, globally, only 9% is recycled. So we are way off looking at the circular economy and proper waste management that we dream of. And the problem is it's such a persistent material. It lasts for hundreds or thousands of years, and so it doesn't go away. So unless it's been burnt, every single piece of plastic ever made still exists on our planet. So now we're just working out what to do with that, and we have that awareness. The fact we have a full room today, the fact that you'll see lots of stories in the media, and the fact you see such an incredibly diverse panel, and that's represented around the plastic conversation, is one that everyone wants to solve. Working in conservation, which can be quite challenging in finding solutions that everybody wants. The topic around plastic is really interesting because so many actors are coming to the table, either from a business perspective who are leading because it's with their personal values and identifies with that organization, from a financial sense, from an innovation, from a design sense. And for me as a scientist and a conservationist, it's all about change.
Let me just take up one figure you mentioned, because I think it's an important fact that when we talk about the 9% of plastic being recycled at the moment, I think it's 9.5 or so at the moment, this is not because of a scientific reason. I mean, we are able to recycle them with the PET industry. We could. It's just that we don't. That's the main issue, right?
It's a huge mix, and I'll refer to Tom, who's a far more of a specialist on this. But partly it's around the lack of waste collection and management, and some of it's around product design, which is designed to make it fabulous for us to buy and appeal to all of our marketing, but not necessarily around what happens to it at the end of life. And so what is starting to change by some organizations is to design with that future in mind, with the grandchildren in mind, and a more sustainable system in mind. So we go from plastic to landfill or plastic to the ocean, then goes from plastic to plastic. So, Tom.
Yes, please,
Sure.
Tom.
I'd happily build on that. I think to give a sense of what are the factors that play into this, first, everything in the world is technically recyclable. There's basically nothing that can't be technically processed. So it really comes down to, is it practically recyclable? Even here in Switzerland, which is one of the more advanced recycling markets, there's so many things that you don't have a recycling solution for, and that's why a large percentage of the waste here in Switzerland is incinerated. What makes something practically recyclable is entirely due to economics. Waste management companies are in the business of urban mining. That is actually recycling. And that means that they're going to mine what they can mine at a profit after their cost of collecting it and processing it. If that cost is lower than what they can sell it for, they will do so. Everything else, if it costs more to collect and process, that's an unprofitable business model, so they won't do it, and they'll instead look at what is the cheapest way to dispose it within the laws of the land. Here, that would be mostly waste to energy, because there's a lot of anti-landfill legislation. In countries like the United States where I live, that will be landfilling. And in countries that don't have the infrastructure, which is a tremendous number of countries aren't developed yet, it will be a lot of littering, which ends up in rivers and ends up in oceans. And so it all comes down to the economics of waste. And some of the big macro challenges that are taking us, unfortunately, in the wrong direction is driven by consumers, which is that consumers, we want things that are convenient and affordable. So cheap and simple. And if you think about packaging, how's it progressed? You know, it's gone from heavy refillable bottles, you know, to aluminum cans, to PET bottles, to cartons, to pouches, if you think about beverages. And every step along the way, recycling gets cut in half, not because they can't be recycled, but because they're less profitable to recycle. And the moment you get to a pouch, it's not economical to do so. And this is finally compounded by macroeconomic trends, which are low prices of oil. That's what recycling competes against. So if oil became expensive, recycling would boom and increase. And also end markets, countries like China who stopped importing, make it also much more difficult to find places to take it to. So recycling as an overall idea in the world is struggling because of all these factors. And again, it comes down to us as individuals who are out there purchasing these products to buy the products that you can locally recycle and then to do so. That's so critically important, and try to resist that urge of just the compulsive shopping where you blindly purchase just whatever makes you feel at the moment good.
Thank you very much. Maybe Peter, if I take that point, that you know it would be possible, and we could solve it as much as we can quite quickly. But if it goes down to profit, if it goes down to money, if it goes down to maybe also our personal laziness, or that we don't want to spend too much, is that the main problem that you're facing as well? That you see that it would be. We're not talking about a technological problem, or the solutions would be there in a way.
Well, when you're talking about solutions, first of all, it's a complex problem with complex solutions. I think we have to accept that there's no silver bullet when it comes to plastic solutions, plastic pollution. We've got choices before us, though, as individuals and as governments and as multilateral organizations, choices to make. Obviously, the recycling one is a very important part of it, and if you listen to Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola while you're here in Davos, you'll see that recycling is going to be a big part of our future. But it's only like the end point, as far as I'm concerned. There is also the refuse, reuse, and reduce aspect that we as individuals can take upon ourselves. I remember first of all, I remember when plastic started. I'm old enough for that. Sitting in Fiji, we're sitting around 11-year-olds smoking our cigarettes at school break, you know, bad boys, and somebody produced a plastic Bic cigarette lighter. And I remember that we were all actually appalled by it because there was nowhere to fill the lighter fluid in the top. And we said, what's going to happen to this? They said, we just throw it away. They're so cheap, you get another one. And I said, but what happens to this stuff? Oh, it never destroys it, you know. So sure enough, plastic cigarette lighters a year later were starting to show up on the beaches, and they've been accumulating there ever since. So we have this personal choice of whether to use those or not. I personally gave up smoking a couple of years later when I was a teenager, but I personally have never bought one of those plastic lighters. I find them repulsive, quite frankly, the whole concept of them. I remember my mother at that time, she had got into the idea of using plastic bags in the kitchen, but our clothesline in the backyard was always of these plastic bags on the clothesline, drying out after they were being used so they could be reused again. She wasn't an ecologist, she was just living in that post-war generation that did not want to waste what we had, right? Take me, a Fijian, who always thought that, okay, if you want to be a modern person, you've got to own a car. I always drove around Fiji in a car. When I got to be an urban person in the late 80s, I realized by about the mid-90s, why the heck am I owning a car if I'm living in a city with great public transportation? What am I doing this for? And if I'm in a hurry, I can take a taxi. I don't need to own a car. Now, I have never owned a car for, 25 years now. I'm now living in London. If somebody gave me a car, I won the lottery or something, I would refuse it. It would be a nightmare to me. Where would I park it? You know, I have to worry about maintaining the car and everything. So we can make personal, rational choices which are about not being in the consumer trap of having to buy. Whenever I go onto an airline, for example, I protest because it's almost all airlines do it now. Everything is wrapped in plastic. Your pillow, your blankets, your little kit, everything inside the kit's wrapped in plastic. I didn't ask for that. I didn't pay for that. Well, in fact, I did pay for it. But I always protest. Why? Who is putting this stuff on us? We as individuals have the power to refuse it, not to accept it. You know, the obvious one being the plastic bag at the supermarket counter, and I'm sure none of you ever take those bags out. Developing countries are way ahead on this, I'd like to tell you. There's over 50 countries now have banned single-use plastic bags. You know, we've got to move on this stuff. We have individuals, consumers, and voters, and we have power to do this.
Thank you very much. Some important takeaways, not least one that you started smoking with 11, but that's not the the main issue today.
But I gave up at 13.
I'll take that as a kind of a, it is a personal mindset as well. And I was just wondering, when we talk about plastics, it's something that I don't remember having talked about, as you say, 10 or 20 years ago. It was just normal. Nowadays, I think it's safe to say it's almost like the most demonized material we can talk about. Cathy, do you think could that be the first step to kind of more awareness, more a solution-based kind of possibility that yes, we still have everything wrapped in plastic, but in a way we all know that it's not a good thing.
Right. I do agree that plastics are usually associated with a bad name, a bad rep. But on the other hand, we know that there are climate change deniers out there, but I feel that there are fewer plastic pollution deniers because you see the real impacts that are affecting communities. You see the plastic bottles that are washing up on beaches. So it's very, very hard to ignore evidence that's right in front of your eyes. So I'm kind of hopeful for the fact that, it's harder to kind of turn away from that problem. And I also wanted to kind of talk about some of the solutions that young people are coming up with around the world to address this issue. And this is all very regionally focused because every every cultural context requires a culturally specific strategy to make a real impact. So, global shapers around the world have taken it upon themselves to implement some projects to both conserve our natural environment, reduce the use of plastic, and also transform plastics into value-added products. So one example is from one of the Global Shaper Hub in Lima, Peru. They led an ocean cleanup movement that featured 10,000 youth volunteers. This movement is the largest beach cleanup movement in Peru. It was started by 2 global shapers and just expanded to 10,000 volunteers. And their initial objective was to basically shape policy and get the Congress to adopt a plastics ban. They achieved that objective because the government saw the amount of work that went into collecting data on the different types of plastics that were being found on the beaches. This kind of data actually fed into a lot of the congressional legislative debates in Peru. And it also kind of points to the importance of citizen science, being all of us able to kind of work together and kind of come up with the solutions and collect evidence to inform policy. And so going to Gloria's point earlier, she had mentioned that, we need to kind of start locally before we can expand. This is an example of local, really grassroots, youth-driven movement that actually now has a lot of corporate partnerships because companies recognize that they need to get in this. It's not just a problem, it's an opportunity. And the youth that are backing this movement, that are leading this movement, have a lot of energy, a lot of willingness to make change. So this is the right moment, it's the right place, and I just want to leave it at that, and I can come to other examples later on as well.
In our case,
Yes, please.
in our case, there's actually no manual for an organization that tells you how are you making that change. So we had to learn a lot along the process. We started in Spain. We didn't ban the plastic. We also looked for the best alternatives in every moment. We gave it a very rigorous approach. We had guidelines like certifications like DIN in Germany, OK Compost in Belgium, and we were looking at every time either for a way of recycling, where there was a waste recycling system available, or for elements that were completely compostable or biodegradable in order to prepare. Because right now, in these 3 months, we're doing the rollout to other countries with a level of complexity like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Jamaica. And in that case, we said, there's no system of waste treatment there. So the only way we can do it to start really walking the path is to have that guarantee of biodegradability and compostability in order to then shift forward. But I feel that what differentiated the stress and the effort that we did is the rigorosity on the approach of looking to the alternatives. So when you mentioned before the collaborations, I think it would be very interesting if there would be a common ground on what materials are available, what kind of alternatives do really work, and what are the best usages for that.
Just quickly before we go to Heather and then Tom, how do you deal with it on a daily basis in your company, in your hotels, for example? Have you banned plastic bottles? Are you only using glass bottles? Is there some kind of a corporate strategy or corporate rules that you give out to all the hotels?
We were working for a whole year actually. We did an X-ray of what we were consuming when it comes to plastics, single-use plastics, right? And we had 3,600 items, different items of plastic internally in the organization. So we did the analysis on to which department they pertained, whether it was a kitchen, whether it was a room, and then in every case we had some work groups and task forces in order to prepare for those changes. I'll give you an example. If we wanted to change all the mini doses of gels, shampoos that we have in the hotels, we don't have them anymore. They're multiple use dosers made of recycled plastic. We had to train the ladies that were actually coming to clean the rooms to make that change in order for them to understand how to use the new products. Another example could be the coffee capsules. We changed those for compostable items. So we also had to explain how the client could come to a room and recycle that and where it had to place that item, how it had to change it. And all that process, we really realized that speaking about it, training and training our people was the most important part of it, because if our people didn't understand it, it would be very difficult then for our client to understand it.
So did you have to explain more to the staff than to the clients?
I think you have different stakeholders, so people that are of interest to you, that you know that they have to help you to push this process and this idea that you have. And for us, the most important one was the employees. We had to start with them. So we had to start with the 35,000 employees because they had to understand why you were doing it. One of the things that made me spark that idea is that one day I was walking towards one of our hotels in the Dominican Republic, and I know it wasn't badly intentioned, but I heard one of the waiters saying, "Oh, no, Iberostar is doing this to save costs. They're not serving any more a plastic bottle individually." And I started smiling internally, but it made me spark and said, there's a lot of work to do in the training, because people, you cannot impose it. You have to convince them. So we've done a lot of conviction and a lot of training along this year that we've done it. And now we're intensely dedicated to the rollout in the 19 countries, because we have a compromise now within the next year and a half to do it in the rest of the countries.
And when you talk about 3,600, I think it was products, is there a end goal where you say we want to go down to this or this number?
So interestingly enough, I think that without sounding arrogant, but we're doing our homework, right? So, but there's a last step that will come from the legislation. There's certain areas like the kitchens that I would love to go into one of the fridges of my hotels and not see a card completely rolled in film with the date and the date of consumption. But I cannot avoid that because legislation forces me to do that. So what we're doing parallel to the effort internally is we're also promoting for the different stakeholders, whether it be political speakers, economical interests in the different countries where we are, to shift, to make a shift in that aspect as well.
Thank you. Heather, sorry, I cut you short.
No, that's fine. I think it is important not to demonize plastic. It's an incredible material, a phenomenal invention, and we basically, it's transformed our lives, improved life expectancy, all sorts of wonderful things. We're targeting particular areas where we take this incredible product that lasts for hundreds or thousands of years, and it's the single-use side. So 40% of all plastic produced each year, it goes to make single-use plastic, and that's the initial target, I think, of change. And again, lots of different innovations happening on that. And it does come back. We've actually got a project happening in London. It's a sort of an experiment to look at how do you change a system. So it's obviously a developed country society where you can go to the tap and have perfectly clean water that comes out of it that's better regulated than water in plastic bottles. And we were like, how do we shift that system from one that's become, over a very short period of time, a plastic plastic disposable society? How might we shift that to a refill one? So in the same way, do your homework. We did the research. We looked at interviews right the way across the supply chain, from the producers to the consumers. And we identified 11 different barriers to change. And some of that is just people using a refillable bottle. They're worried about cleaning them. They leak. They're not very good. Men, we found, were less likely to carry a refillable bottle because they're less likely to have a bag with them. So there's all these things that we have to overcome if we're going to change the system. And another key one... Quite basic,
right?
simple behaviour. But also it was access to water. So again, a busy, big global city, and it's on the go. So people who are commuting, travelling, going to meetings, taking their kids to school, who don't necessarily bring the water with us. And with British culture, it turns out that people want to refill their bottles, but 80% were too embarrassed to go into a cafe or shop and ask if they could be refilled. Right. So we're trying to break down that system, working with the Mayor of London. We've installed 17 water fountains already in public spaces, and there's 100 more going in. So that they've got to be clean, they've got to be looked after and maintained, and we've got to encourage people to use them. And we're also working with a scheme called Refill, where it's as simple as putting a sticker on a cafe or a shop or a hotel and saying, we're quite happy for you to come in and we'll fill your bottle for free.
So the famous British politeness can be part of the...
It's a very big barrier in our society, and that's something that we have to overcome. So it is understanding the local context and targeting how you make the biggest change. So whether it's training your staff, whether it's engaging youth, or whether it's breaking down some of those barriers that are going to allow that change to happen, then we can start to see really big transformations.
Tom, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, I just want to echo the statement that that was said, is that we see as consumers the visible part of this, the bottles we touch, the bags we interact with. But what's really important to try to have a sense of is as well the entire supply chain to get that item to physically, to you. For example, apples may show up at a supermarket, with no packaging, but they would have stepped through layers and layers and layers of plastics to be able to arrive at that supermarket and be consumed. It's just like the food service items, I think, that you were chatting about. And just to echo behavior a little bit, to build on the point, I think behavior is really, really important. It was a scary study for me. We went to a train station in New York City and put out a beautifully labeled recycling bin. There could be no confusion. And right beside it, a really negatively labeled landfill bin, and 50% of people who were walking by and had a recyclable bottle would put it in the wrong bin. 50%. It was absolutely shocking that even if the packaging is technically recyclable and there's practical options available, our apathy is so high. Now, it tended to be more men, so for the men in the audience, we have to work especially hard. Women were better. Kids were by far below 18 were absolutely the very best. So just, it's important to self-reflect on that, especially if you're in our demographic here. But it was an interesting types of solutions. You could solve this by incentivizing. Deposit laws are a good example of that, and that does help boost recycling. You could solve that by fining. I know, for example, here in Switzerland, there's fines if you do it incorrectly. That also helps. That's either through carrot or sticks. But you can also do it without concept of money. An interesting idea there, through a partnership with PepsiCo, we installed little computers in these bins that when you put your bottle in to the right one, it would trigger an infrared trigger, and it would give you back just a sound file basically saying thank you for recycling, or a joke or something like that. And it boosted compliance to 90% in the right direction just by having people smile. And then the best was little kids were running around trying to find the next bottle, even taking them out of the wrong bin to put it in to get that next, just auditory feedback. So I think we need to also think about how do we make this topic exciting, because I think as it loses that excitement, we gain apathy. And then no matter what infrastructure, laws, and capabilities are put in by all the stakeholders, if we, the people, don't act, then it's all for naught.
I promise you, Tom, we'll make this topic even more exciting now, because it gives me and I'm very glad you talked about young people and the kids, and that gives me the opportunity to kind of open up the discussion a bit. And a little warning, if your Swiss German is a bit rusty, so maybe you take up your headphones, because I want to introduce you to an initiative from Davos. Und das gibt mir wieder.
And that gives me a chance to switch into Swiss German. A great action, a great campaign. Yes, I'm sure there'll be applause later on, and it's well deserved, I can tell you. Plastic is an issue which has attracted a great deal of attention from young people in Davos. And so I think it's interesting for you who live in Davos to hear about it, but also for the others. There are 3 pupils from the secondary school. That's Marat, Ivan, and Marco are with us here today, and they are representatives of their class, a group of boys in Davos, or a group of kids, basically young people in Davos, who have decided to do something about the plastic issue. I'm going to put the question to you. I don't know if you've decided who is going to answer, who is allowed to, or who has to answer the question. Ivan is going to answer the question. Could you perhaps tell us briefly, for the benefit of the panelists, how did you come up with the idea? Well, last year at the WEF, we were part of the sales force, and we had a presentation by a professor from California, Professor Douglas, and we were absolutely horrified to see how much plastic just ends up in the ocean. So we decided, and our teachers at school also discussed the problem at school, plastic issue, and we decided we had to do something about this. We can't change the world, but we need to start somewhere. And plastic is probably the most problematic kind of waste at the moment, and we thought we'd like to try and do something about changing that and start in Davos. So you've taken an initiative. You've just been told where the idea came from, and Marco is going to tell us about the next step. They were determined to do something. They knew they had to do something. And what exactly did you do? What was your plan? How did you implement this idea? Well, we discussed our plan with our teacher, and we thought we could do something about encouraging recycling in Davos. Our teacher, Mr. Schlichting, got some information. He talked to someone who's been doing this for longer than we had. He talked to Mr. Bühler about it. We ordered bags, and all of us from the secondary school got a bag. We were given for free a recycling bag. They're made of bioplastics, these recycling bags. So it's plastic, yes, but it's bioplastics. And I said everyone got a bag. In Davos, as in many other places in Switzerland, PET bottles are collected. There's a collecting point for PET bottles, but not much else is done about collecting plastic waste. It goes into the regular household waste, apart from the bottles. So that brings us to the third step, and that's when you really got going. Now these bags can be bought for 6 francs in Davos in some shops, these special waste collection bags. It started in the autumn. It's a huge success, and this activity is ongoing. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit more about it. Perhaps Mara can tell us what's going to happen next. This is not a one-off initiative. How are you planning to see this developing further in the future? One of our ambitions, obviously, was for this to become a sustainable project, and we didn't want it to be just something that happened for a few weeks and then stopped. And that's an ambition we have achieved. We wanted more containers in Davos. We want to be able to process it here in Davos, because if the waste is transported away from Davos to be processed, that generates more carbon dioxide because of the trucks. So that is what we are now working on. Now, I think everyone can join in the applause, because I think this project deserves a round hand. This is really an example of an initiative which started on a small scale, and it even started at the WEF last year. And you've heard what's happened in the course of 1 year. It started on a small scale, and a lot has happened since then. I see hands going up, so I'm sure that there will be an opportunity for questions and answers with these young people, and I can go back into English.
We hear what these students have done. You know, start something from scratch. They didn't have any help. They wanted more information, and they wanted to take action. Is that, well, it's something very encouraging. I think we all agree on that. In your experience, is that something that's typical, that the action has to come from, I don't know, from the bottom, has to come, you know, very grassroots-like, has to come from the young? To all of you.
Look, I think that plastic has its place, obviously. Probably be with us till the end of the time, but I do think that we'll invent new things, particularly compostable things, for example, which are now already being invented, just a matter of scaling them up. It's got to be the right plastic, and Tom's in better shape than me to describe to you what I mean by the right plastic, because not all plastic is recyclable, or when it's mixed together, it breaks the process down of recycling. So has to be the right kind of plastics and the right kind of uses. And most uses of plastic, in my mind, are unnecessary. It's useful in life, I think. If you think about the world, take it down to your household. You know, if you think about what you've got in your house and have a look around, my wife and I do this all the time. It's amazing how much plastic you've got in your house. It's amazing how much stuff you've got in your house that you don't need. At the heart of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them, I'm sure you know about them. Sustainable Development Goal 14 is the ocean one, in which plastic is mentioned, plastic pollution. At the heart of the Sustainable Goals is SDG 12. That is about consumption and production. And we have to change our consumption and production patterns. And that's up to us as individuals as much as it's up to governments to do so. Because we're just consuming too much, producing too much. We're all becoming middle class, and when the whole world is middle class and has 2 or 3 cars each, I'm sorry, that everything collapses. The planet cannot sustain that. So we have to change our consumption patterns, and plastics part of that.
But let me just ask you again, for the awareness part, I mean, we've seen here, it's young people. I know you have 3 granddaughters, I think. Do you think it's a generational thing as well, that young people get it more or are more aware?
When I was living in New York, I rang up my grandchildren and said, no, you must not use that horrible cling wrap stuff. You know, it's vile that people wrap their food in that cling wrap stuff. It really is vile. And you shouldn't use plastic lunch boxes anymore. And they let me talk on as the grandfather. Eventually they said to me, Pappy, at our school, nobody is allowed to bring plastic to school. The whole school is plastic free. You know, this is just a little primary school in Auckland, New Zealand. And hopefully that's the way the rest of the world is going, that they get it. You know, they see that they can't have that sort of stuff in their future.
Heather, what do you think? Is it a generation thing?
Well, firstly, congratulations. That's an inspirational example. And I think a lesson for everybody in the room is if we're all sitting here this time next year, what will you have done? That compares with what a group of students did from coming to listen to a presentation. And it is all something that everybody can do something about. So it's starting small. It can start with an individual. So to my plastic water bottle example, everybody in the UK, and it's a very similar figure in Europe, adults use about 175 single-use plastic water bottles every year. So if you just do the maths in this room, if all of us used a refillable bottle from this point on, that's a huge difference. It's 1 billion bottles at the London level. So what I'm thinking, of course, is, okay, how from Davos, how about cloisters? How about what's your community? What other schools can you reach out to? And in the UK, there's a similar initiative because the youth are inheriting a plastic world from our generation, and they are part of the solution, both from innovation and pressure. And so there's a charity I'm a trustee of called Surfers Against Sewage in the UK that has a plastic-free schools initiative that provides examples to get from one plastic use to get rid of it. So to your example, Gloria, of the case, documenting the case studies to make it easier for everybody else. So can you share your example to other schools in Switzerland to see how many schools could have signed up to do exactly what you're doing by this time next year?
Good idea.
First Tom and then Gloria, please. Yes.
So I'd like to make 2 independent points. One is to really echo what you were saying, which is not just waste, but every environmental issue from species reduction, deforestation, climate change. I can't really think of any environmental issue that is not directly linked to only one thing, which is consumption. And consumption is growing because the population is growing, of course, but it's also growing per capita. If you compare someone alive today, one of us sitting in this room, to someone alive just 100 years ago, we consume 10 times more physical objects, 10 times more stuff than someone alive just 1 century ago. And so the absolute best thing you can do to save the environment without having to understand any of the details, because it can get very complex very quickly, is just stop purchasing. It's that easy. Or purchase less. You can also share versus own. These are foundational solutions, and the easiest way to think about that is, do you derive your joy from the act of shopping? Or do you derive your joy from some other way? Interacting with friends, experiencing nature, seeing, learning like you're here today. And I think we have too easily put our happiness into this act of purchase. And I'm just a hypocrite as much as all of us are, but that's the key thing to focus on. Now the other somewhat independent point I'd like to make is, here's the simple guide to understand what plastics are good and what are not so good. It's all about value. That's the point. It's not about some magic of what can be recycled or not. What recyclers want are clear, rigid plastics. That's a very, very simple rule. You don't have to know what the plastic is. Just clear, rigid is really good. Then the lighter, the better, in the sense that color is a contaminant. It's just like when kids paint with paints, it all ends up as brown, and you can't ever unbrown the brown. So you want to keep the colors separate. So try to buy clear or white, rigid, and stay away from things that are complex. Those are some simple rules. And one last point, I know we've talked about biodegradable. Not everything is so clear. You know, biodegradable has a wonderful place in emerging markets where most waste is littered, and if it ends up in the aquatic system, it's better, or in the natural system is littered, better that it has a path to degrade faster than a non-degradable choice. But biodegradable plastics actually in developed markets are a very big problem. And a good example of this, not to go into too much detail, is we've worked with Tesco, a major retailer in the UK, who has outlawed biodegradable plastics from being sold in their stores starting this April. And the reason they have is because biodegradable plastics are a contaminant to the people who actually have to degrade them, composters. Composters want your banana peels, your coffee grounds, your leaves, while biodegradable plastic will actively degrade. There's no question. You couldn't grow a plant from it. It's effectively a dead material. And so in many countries, when Tesco looked into this in the UK, the composters are sorting out all that biodegradable plastic that's put into a green bin, destroying it, and then actively processing what they want. So the key punchline here is give the waste management industry what it wants versus projecting responsibility onto it to deal with our problems.
And we learn from that there is indeed not a silver bullet and one solution. Gloria, you had to.
So I'm a firm believer in the youth. So first, congratulations. There's always such a special energy in the youngsters and the way you're doing things. Professor Macaulay is a scientific advisor of ours in our project. So he's actually helping us a lot in constructing the way we do things. And the first thing he said, he's like, you have to tackle the children. You have to tackle the youngsters. So we did a lot of programs with the children that came with their families to our hotels in order for them to explain how you can recycle, what can you do. And I could not agree more with Tom. If you look at a biodegradable product, ask yourself the questions, what kind of product is it? Is it oxo biodegradable? Is it made of a natural material? To give you an example, we use plastic bags that are made of potato starch. We have toothbrushes that are made out of corn, and shaving handles for the shavers that are made out of bamboo. But we are in conversations now with all the recycling companies like TerraCycle. There's another one in Mallorca called Thienemann that we collaborate a lot because we are asking them that question. Is it worthwhile to look for that alternative? And what do you do with it? And I think those questions for you are key on what do you do in Davos, how do you recycle it, and continue expanding. Look for clusters and continue with that energy. Congratulations.
I'd love to speak more about initiatives that are going on more on a kind of an international level. Before giving it to you as well, open up the panel as well for questions and comments. But Cathy, please, you asked for the word as well.
All right, thank you. Congratulations. You guys inspire me. You are the next generation of global shapers. You don't have to be in part of the official Global Shapers community to shape your societies. So really, really proud of you. And I want to echo Heather's point on, the question of what next. You want to make the project sustainable. And thinking about what can you do to scale up or expand or tackle other issues that are related to plastic pollution. And I wanted to give you something that's maybe food for thought for you. So a few shapers in the Mumbai hub in India launched a project called Bottle Bricks. Essentially, they collected over 6,000 plastic bottles, and they turned that into bricks. So plastic bottles turned into bricks, and those bricks then were transformed into buildings and furniture that people could use. So it's the idea of using plastic to turning plastic into useful products that people can generate value from. So they actually partnered with 50 schools and over 1,500 students. And so I'm just thinking in relation to the project you did, there's an element of capacity building and training and spreading the word to your peers and also people in other generations. I think you guys play a big role in terms of being the messengers and the emissaries of this important cause. Don't give up hope. It's difficult definitely to start up a project from scratch with no resources. You guys are already doing a great job. You guys, I think the benefit of our generation is that we're a little bit impatient and we want change to happen right away. But sometimes we'll also need to take a pause and think about what are the steps we need, who are the partners we need to kind of scale up and move forward with this initiative. And so I'm happy to continue the conversation with you later on as well.
Great, lots of praise for you guys. Veel lob, it's my understanding.
Lots of praise. Now I think you've got to spread this to Klosters and the rest of the Prättigau.
Well, before I take over again, so please, feel free. We have questions. We already have raised arms. I see 3 or 4. We have plenty of. Oh wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. Yes, we start all in the back, maybe there. We have, do we have the microphones there? Okay, great.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Well, hi to all. First of all, I beg your pardon for my English. It's not very good.
Sie können auch sonst auch auf Deutsch oder
You can speak German or Swiss German if you'd like, because there is interpretation.
okay.
I don't speak very well, anyway. I don't look like young, but I am young. My look is something others. But I also searched a solution for this problem. From 1 hour, I not yet hear a word about solution for the plastic pollution. 3 months ago, I grounded with other people one new association that has already 2 solutions for the 2 problems of the plastic pollution. One for the macroplastic and one for the microplastic. Are 2 different problems. We have 2 different solutions and machinery for cleaning the waters in the world.
So, yes, please, go ahead.
The association is born now. We start now to work. I hope we can next year bring some results to you. The association name is Hydrosphere Association. In 2 weeks you can find online the website, not yet ready.
Okay, before we go too much into advertising, or so, but it's just good to know that there are initiatives and there are ideas. I would suggest also there are people here on the panel, so you can maybe you can bilaterally speak about solutions and possible ways out of the issue as well. We gladly take this on board. Maybe if you find, then we can bilaterally speak about that. Thank you very much. We will be talking about solutions. I can assure you as well. Let me have a young voice there as well. There's a student sitting there with a.
Thank you. So this question is mainly directed at Mr. Szaky. Sorry if I said that wrong.
No problem.
You talked a lot about behavior and the effect this can have on the consumption and production. Some experiments you'd ran on interactive methods. Are those used on social media? And if so, what other methods do you see possible for changing this behavior to in turn change the consumption?
It's a really good question because especially here in Switzerland, but I think anywhere where all of us live, we're all a privileged audience. The infrastructure more or less is there to give us the choices. That wouldn't be the answer if we were sitting right now in Laos or Cambodia or other areas, but we are here in Switzerland. And so most of it has to do with behavior. Now the other thing that's very important is all of us, I think, are incredibly aware of the issue. I think why there's an audience here. So I don't think it's what we need to do is, we have to be aware, but doing it through negative reinforcement, all the negatives could lead to someone saying what you said at the very beginning of this whole panel, it is too big of a problem, so I'm just not going to take part. And then I'm frankly going to keep contributing to it. Because if you check out it's very hard to avoid disposability. It follows us like a wake on a boat. So you have to consciously avoid it. Like what you did in your hotels, that's a conscious decision. That wasn't necessarily the easy one that every hotel can follow. And so the biggest lesson I've learned in behavior change is you don't need necessarily money. You don't have to pay people to change. The incentive to give can be in the form of happiness and feeling purpose. Today we live in a news environment where the news is horrible, no matter where we look, whether it's, at the UK or the US or Brazil, all these examples of negative stories, even this plastic issue in of itself a negative story. It's horrible. There's not good out there. And I think people are good people. Generally we want to feel like we can contribute, and we want to contribute in a positive way. But we want to be given the choice to do that. And framing in social media, a good example is what doesn't work would be like shaming someone. Oh, I saw someone putting in the wrong bin, and that does happen on social media versus doing the opposite. Imagine if someone camped out at a recycling bin and started posting everyone who did it right. How cool would that be? And it's that positive. It may not seem as meaningful, but it really multiplies in an absolutely brilliant way. And using that, because we tend to focus on the negative so much, that little smile is actually such a massive motivator. And then to spread that. And I think also, it's what was said earlier on this idea of consumption. We need to make the idea of modest or reasonable living the way that it was a few generations ago cool. Because if you look at TV, what's cool, right? Having 3 houses, private jets, big cars. That's a lot of stuff to deal with, Like we have to also shift what is hip and what is cool. And you look pretty cool. Do it yourself, right? And then hopefully, I'm sure your friends will follow. And that's how these movements get created. But do it all through the art of positive.
Peter, can I just add to that? Is the personal initiative, is that the main driver, or do you see it more as, I guess the big elephant in the room is also, does this have to be regulated? Does this have to be forced as well? I mean, should it go beyond the kind of personal initiative?
Yeah, look, just to answer the gentleman at the back, if he hasn't been listening, if he says no solutions have been mentioned from our talk this morning, I've counted about 50 different solutions. There is no single silver bullet solution to this plastic problem that we've put on the world. There's going to be multiple solutions. And everybody with good intentions has to work to get there. Individuals, families, communities, cities, regional governments, national governments, regional organizations of nations, and the global organizations. Everybody has a responsibility to sort out this problem. By the way, it's only one of the multitude of problems the ocean has, the plastic one, but it's a big one. Because of our clothing, we have microfibers of plastic which has absolutely inundated the ocean, from the Arctic to the Antarctic. The microfibers, and the animals are eating that, and it's ending up back on our plates. To what the pictures you've seen of the plastic soups that are out there in the great jars. It is a major problem, but it's just one of the many. And responsibility, I get back to that, it goes from the individual to the global organization and everything in between, and there is no simple solution. We've all got to work at this with good intention.
Can I just echo this point on the clothing that you mentioned today? There's basically 3 types of clothing. You have your natural clothing, cotton shirts and wool and so on. Those are absolutely fine. But then you have your your plastic clothing, nylons and so on. And then especially most of the clothing today is hybrids, these combinations of organic materials with plastic. If your pants stretch, you have a hybrid. 70% of the clothing in this room, including ours on stage, is plastic. The big issue here is when you wash a garment, microfibers come off, and none of our washing machines have the filters to catch these microfibers. They are effectively the ultimate degraded plastics. It's the same thing plastic packaging will degrade to over many years, and it's monumentally bigger than the disposable plastic issue by far from a microplastic pollution problem. So what's the solution, right? Not just here's the negative, is when you buy a garment, most of the microfibers are knocked off in the first 3 washes, 90%. And then relatively few every wash thereafter. It's important to note that an average, I know it's for women, an average woman in the Western world today buys 67 garments per year and uses them on average 3 times before disposal, which is exactly the maximum of the washing issue. So the solution is buy awesome clothing that you're going to love and enjoy for a very long time. To avoid this, or just buy someone's used clothing that was hopefully also awesome and enjoyed.
Very good, very hands-on solution. Yes,
May
Gloria.
I ask Tom one question? So this year we started that all the uniforms that we have in our organization are made of recycled plastic. How does that statistic apply to recycled plastic material?
Exactly the same. So
exactly the same in 3
yes.
washes?
Yes, exactly the same. Because it's when a new item is made, there's a lot of lot that can come off in the first cycles. So, but the real answer here is keep those moving. As long as the staff aren't rotating through the shirts very quickly, it's better than if they have high rotation. So, the question is, if you have seasonal staff, can that garment travel to the next one, or does it end with that staff member? It's a big question here is about making things last. That's a foundational solution to a lot of this. But it's also important to look at these externalities, right? And then because it's a really incredible decision to go to recycled plastic. That's really big. And then the more information you have, the more you can point that in the right direction.
But I would challenge you then, because we're looking at alternative products that are not recycled plastic, but you realize that the organic materials don't have the lifespan that the recycled materials. And I believe this questioning comes back to the mention of Peter, that there's no cookie cutter solution. You just have to keep on moving, learning around the process, but really start moving.
And I'd say its lifespan is the key. Right, that is the great
Maybe
divider.
let me see whether we've got other questions here. Yeah, we've got some. So hard to pick. Oh, someone's waving like crazy there. So we were going to give him the mic. Please make it as short as possible, maybe.
All right, I'll try to keep it short. Hi, my name is Christian. I work with LinkedIn, and thank you so much for all being here. I would like to. My question is about scalable and financially sustainable solutions to plastic pollution. So for example, Mr. Thomson, you talked about personal choice, refuse, reduce, recycle. I don't want to sound like the negative guy in the room, but it sounds like a lot like the climate change movement when people were talking about taking shorter showers or stop taking hot showers, all these different things. We're always talking about behavior change and not about potential real incentives for people to change their behavior. It seems to me that people's just willingness to change is not just strong enough. And I honestly don't want to come back here 10 years from now and see the same panel. I think nobody wants that. So my question is about scalable solutions to plastic pollution, and especially plastic is too cheap to be recycled, right? We've talked about this as well. What is actually needed to solve the problem at the source for this non-recyclable plastic? Are we talking about a plastics tax, like potentially a carbon tax? And especially for Tom, I would love to hear from you regarding technologies to potentially replace this type of plastic. Do we have this type of technology, and is it actually scalable and sustainable? Thank you so much.
Well, I think we had the answer to your questions. Everything would be solved like that. But as we've said, it is a very complex situation. And I don't want to be the negative guy in the room either. I'm a grandfather. I've got to give a world to my grandchildren. Which is livable in. So the climate change movement, I'd just like to say that this is not about movements. This is about the fundament. Our climate is changing, our ocean is changing, all of us are involved, you know. And so, you know, this is, as we've been talking about responsibility today, this is what it is. It's about individual responsibilities going up to the government responsibilities. I'll let Tom answer the second part of your question, but I would say that I am neither an optimist nor a pessimist. I'm a pragmatist. I believe in governance and taking action, pragmatic action to change things. And that's what we're doing. And I think it was Heraclitus who said, that was the first person to say, has been said a million times since, that change is the one constant. I live in a house in London, which was a house for horses 100 years ago. There are 10,000 houses like that in central London. They're the Mews houses. They were for the horses. Why? Because 100 years ago there were no cars. Everybody was going around on horses, right? Change happened overnight, and suddenly everybody's in cars. The next change, for the better, is going to happen very quickly as well. Let's be part of the change.
But yes, please.
No, and I think the interesting metaphor when you say from horses to cars is, I think, the questions we need to ask here, because the car just is better than the horse for a whole host of reasons. And why did plastic win really in 1950? That's when this all came about. You said you remember pre-plastic. And I'm sure there's others in the room that remember it too. I just romanticize over it myself. But what did it come to? Two things. It beat what was there. It was better. And what people wanted was cheap and convenient. And what I think the key challenge is, and this goes to everybody, this goes to young folks, entrepreneurs, large organizations, governments, to set the stage and then to think about what are the models through which we don't have this addiction to disposability, that are in fact ideally better for the consumer, because I believe that is what's going to really be the goal. If we do it through sacrifice, it's going to be always a small group. But if we can do it through improvement, bringing out the future. That is going to be what's really going to change the world. And we see this already in sharing economy. I mean, look at what Airbnb, for example, did in the hotel industry. And they are incredibly big and have done a lot of...
Say the travel industry.
Oh, the whole, right? What has happened there, and that's an example of sharing. What has Uber done in the transportation market? What has bike sharing done? I think if we really think about these, there's lots of opportunities within them to explore and to bring out a better world where this is no longer the case.
Can I just
And
take
Tom,
up
with
that?
it, so if I just may,
Yeah.
because Tom said cheap and inconvenient were the winners, right? Which they were. He's quite right. And we were sold a dummy there, as we now know when we look at the ocean and look at our climate. We were sold a dummy that cheap and convenient is the way to go, the throwaway society. It was not the way to go. It's got us into the mess we're in now. So I'm hoping that the change that is going to come, and I do believe, change is that constant. We're going to change for the better. We're going to change in a way that it's not cheap and convenient. We're going to change in a way that's going to put us back into a relationship of respect with the environment on which we depend for our existence.
I'm just wondering, Heather, do you think to force that change? And that's part of that question as well. Maybe we have to force people as well, be it via taxes or the incentives is one thing, but maybe regulation is needed there as well. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't one solution. We've said that multiple times, but there is a huge portfolio globally of solutions out there. Some of those are developed at the grassroots level. Some of them are led by government. Some of them are led by huge change we're seeing within businesses. So we're seeing supermarkets, we're seeing the big drinks companies, we're seeing the packaging companies on the case, forming alliances, changing the way they do things. It's being taken very seriously because of the responsibility of what's happening, the awareness of what's happening, and from customer pressure. So there is a role for factually correct, optimistic social media in that way. Politicians are saying that their inboxes are full of questions about what they're doing about plastic. The same applies to businesses. So it is a time of unprecedented attention on this issue and an opportunity to have your voice to be part of that. And that means that the businesses make it a lot easier for you. If you go into a store and you can't buy damaging stuff, even if you're reducing the stuff, then it's an awful lot easier. If you're out and about with your refillable bottle and you know it's going to be super easy to refill it, then it all starts to normalize more sustainable behavior. It makes it easier for us to implement more sustainable behavior, and it reduces the temptation for higher consumption that is less sustainable. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but it isn't something you can say, it's the responsibility only of business. It's the responsibility of only of youth. It's, it's a tax is going to work. I mean, it does in the UK, a 5 pence tax on plastic bags,
right, yeah.
reduced plastic bags by 80%.
Yes.
Measurably, that's a huge response. That's not going to work across all kinds of plastic.
But it's got to hurt a bit.
It has, and I mean, the economics behind plastic to incentivize oil versus recycling is a very complex economy, but it's certainly not tipped in the balance of recycling. And I think that, not being an economist, but certainly could change in a much more supportive direction to enable the recycling companies like TerraCycle and others to compete fairly and to actually develop more solutions that also can work in developing countries where there's no waste management systems, which is a lot more complex.
Okay. Speaking about fair, I have the impression I have unfairly treated this side of the audience because I've always gone, yes, he agrees, so maybe I'll give you the, or, shall we take, yes, please, shall we take the female student there, and I don't forget you, we'll come to you afterwards.
So there's a really big zero waste movement going on right now, and I was wondering, how do you think, because a lot of people buy like one-use plastic for convenience, like in supermarkets, how do you think supermarkets and things like the fashion or beauty industry and the sport industry could reduce the one-use plastic to aid consumers as well in becoming more zero waste?
I think that would be a question for Tom, I guess.
Gosh, it's a really, really good question. I'm going to flip it, right? You're absolutely right. There's a zero waste movement, and thank goodness. And here's the way to think about, I think, the producer and the retailer, those actors. Their job is not so much to give us, to force things upon us. Their job, and this is what market research is, focus groups, all this whole industry is to figure out what you want and to give that to you in the best, most cool, affordable way possible, and maybe then to extrapolate on what you want to think about what you may want tomorrow, but that's about it, right? So think about in the beverage industry. Carbonated sales, like sodas, are going down. So what are the large companies in that space doing? Investing in more healthy drink choices, because that's what you want. And so what's going to be the leading goal in this? Because I work with all these organizations, and I always see them say, is the consumer ready? Will they follow? It's always about the consumer, is to start demanding those things. And if they're not available, start writing them. They take their social media ridiculously seriously. They take their customer service. It's unbelievable how seriously they take it. That's what they make their decisions on. So complain. Complaining does so much in today's, especially social media space, that the little voice amplifies in a way that is much bigger than you would ever expect in the actual decision-making rooms, where people are making a decision on 20 posts that may have happened and really acting. And so do that, and those choices will start appearing in front of you. And then especially when they appear, vote for them with your money. Because if they appear and you don't vote for them, they're gone. And once they're gone, they're very hard to bring back again, because then the companies internally will say, we tried authentically, and the consumer didn't want it. It takes another 10 years for that to be tried again. And so it's very much in that mode, because until that happens, they won't have the internal ability to put it out.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more question from you. I'm so sorry for all the others. The shorter it is, of course, the better the chances that we...
Thank you. So may I ask you to use the headsets, because I like to talk
in German, of course.
In German, yeah. Thanks also dass du die Linken auch zur Wort.
I'm grateful that you've also given the floor to the left side of the room. Let me begin by correcting 2 points raised by Tom. In Switzerland, we don't have landfill. Household waste is incinerated in very sophisticated units. We don't have any laws as to how we should handle plastic waste. It's left up to us. And the initiative of the kids, they're actually my students, is a good example of this. It took us a year, Urs. The most important part was to get the people of Davos to join in, to follow the project. They went to all the schools, they provided information, talked to the children, to the parents. They handed out loads of leaflets, and they made a very detailed presentation, which was on a site which got a lot of hits, and then the plastic bags were handed out. This was the basic work they did, and they did it very well, providing information. And these students showed how important information and training is. We haven't said much about that. I'm glad to see that everyone here has the same intentions. 20 years ago, it would have been different. And perhaps in the American Congress, it would be different today as well. There'd be opponents. But I think explanation and information is crucial. That's where we don't have curricula for the schools, and a lot more needs to be done about providing curricula in the schools to train and teach the children. Thank you very much. I think that's a very useful message.
Cathy as well, because that's the the main question here or issue was: are we teaching it enough, or are young people aware of it enough? Should it be part of a curriculum? Shouldn't we, not talking too much about, I don't know, new technologies, but also going back to the basics and what does it mean for the environment?
Yes, thank you so much for raising this point. I think it's so important to start in the classroom. When we talk about, extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, I think what starts from the classroom is teaching students about values of restoring nature, conserving, innovation. And these are the same kinds of values that can inform the skills for the jobs of the future. And I know a lot of these students are going to be thinking about what's next for them after graduating. And a key theme of Davos this year is the globalization 4.0 and what skills are needed to kind of prevent the disruption to jobs, or to what are the skills that can be part of the modern economy that you can really take advantage of and be of value to society. And so I think starting with that awareness and capacity building of training students on how to, how to communicate these values to others in their societies. Because once these students like learn about it in the classroom, they can also like teach their parents, for example, back home. And so there was I'm from the Ottawa, Canada hub of the Global Shapers community, and one of my fellow Global Shapers implemented a project called Robot Missions, which basically is a robot designed with 3D printed materials that also is powered by artificial intelligence to basically pick up plastic litter, microplastic litter from beaches. And this is it's more than just about picking up plastic in this case. It's more about the impact of this robot on kind of shaping the narrative around STEM education, so science, technology, mathematics, engineering, and how important that is to shaping the innovation of the future and how youth can really play a big role in it. So I think really big kudos to you for supporting our youth and really teaching them the values of restoration, conservation.
And we have heard yet another solution or yet another trial to solve that problem. Thank you so much. We stretched the time limit a little bit. I'm so sorry for everyone who wanted to contribute and didn't have the chance to, but I think we all agree that this is an ongoing discussion anyway. So it's just the start of a bigger and wider discussion. And thank you very much for the students and their initiatives, for the economy and their initiatives, and the political initiatives as well. I think we all agree as well that it needs all people involved in that as well. And I think we're on a good way if the students learn that as a curriculum as well, or if they don't use plastic at all in schools like your granddaughters as well, Peter. I think you join me in a big applause for all the panelists. Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. Und Ihnen möchte ich danken fürs.
And I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of the web. Thank you very much for showing interest in this session.